One of the most important things that I've learned over the years getting out with so many incredible photographers is that we all learn differently. And unfortunately for me, I seem to learn quickest when I make a mistake that costs me a photo or many photos, as you'll see in today's video, and I'm then forced to make the necessary changes to correct that mistake. So today I wanted to share with you my hardest learned lessons in wildlife photography. These are going to be both lessons I learned by making mistakes with the camera and making mistakes while out in the field with wildlife. So follow along today as I share with you these mistakes and save yourself these painful lessons by following along in today's video. Let's get into it. I'll be honest, some of these mistakes that I'm going to share with you today are pretty embarrassing. So I invite you to share some of your hardest learned lessons in wildlife photography down in the comments below so that I don't feel like such a fool by the end of this video sharing all of my mistakes. And just as a side note, a lot of the wildlife content, the video footage and photos that I'll be sharing in today's video is not actually from these experiences, since the whole point of this video is a time that I made a mistake and missed something awesome out in nature. We all love those close-up portraits of wildlife when we're photographing them, and the detail that you can capture from those close-up images is just uncomparable. Very early on in my photography journey, I was mostly using an old prime lens. I was so focused on filling the frame with a stationary subject that whenever my subject would begin to move, I was immediately clipping legs, bums, faces, ears, and wings. Many of the images I was taking quickly became unusable due to missing body parts. Because I wasn't giving my subjects room to move in the frame, most of my early photography was very stationary and didn't have much action at all. I feel like this really inhibited my growth as a photographer early on, as I was really just focusing on stationary subjects instead of practicing things like tracking a moving subject or photographing action. When I began photographing more moving subjects, I was so used to photographing wildlife so tight in the frame that I would still rarely give them enough room for movement, and I continued clipping body parts, resulting in mostly unusable images. Eventually, after what seemed like years, oh wait, it did take me years, I finally caught on that you want to give your subject more space to move in the frame than you think they'll need. I still like to get those close-up shots, but as soon as I have them, I either zoom back out or back up to the point where I have more than enough room to capture a scene without cutting off my subject's tails or wings. I'm a notoriously slow learner, but this is one that I'm so grateful that I finally got the hang of. Some lessons are a lot easier to learn than others, and this next lesson that I learned is one that I think many photographers still refuse to acknowledge simply because it's physically uncomfortable and it can be downright miserable to do it. Years ago, I took my brother to Grand Teton National Park. He had never been, so we made a fun weekend trip out of it and had a blast. We went on multiple hikes in that beautiful landscape, saw tons of fun animals, and made lots of great memories. We had got in fairly late in the evening, just as it began to rain. We went to sleep listening to the pitter-patter of rain on the tent and awoke to the same sound. It was still dark, it was a moody, cold, and wet morning, and rather than go out into the darkness to look for wildlife, we chose to stay back in the warm, comfortable, and dry tent. Once the rain stopped, we headed out to see what we could find. We went to the location that we had planned to visit earlier that morning, and do you know what we found? A mother bear and cubs disappearing into the forest, and a very, very happy photographer. He recounted to me the marvelous encounter he had just experienced with a family of bears in the rain, surrounded by purple and gold flowers. He showed me the images he got, and to this day they still haunt me. Cubs playing in the flower-filled meadow, rays of sunlight peeking through the clouds, illuminating them, the mother bear posing perfectly, wet from the rain with fog in the background. We like to tell ourselves that adverse weather conditions won't yield great images, so that we feel good about our decision to stay back in the warm comforts rather than venture out into the elements where so many incredible photo opportunities await. One of my favorite activities each spring is to go out and photograph sage grouse and sharp-tailed grouse. I monitor multiple leks across multiple states for both species and thoroughly enjoy my time with these energetic birds. A few years ago, before starting this YouTube channel, I had a friend reach out to to me about photographing sharp-tailed grouse. He had never done so before and really wanted to. We weren't able to line up our schedules, so instead of taking him out to location, I shared with him the coordinates of my favorite sharp-tailed grouse lek, with the solemn promise from him that he wouldn't disclose this location to anybody else. About 2 weeks later, I returned to the lek to photograph the birds, and what I found just completely devastated me. The previously pristine lek was full of photographers, many of which had driven straight onto the display area in hopes of better pictures. There were no birds in sight and nothing showed up at all that morning. I asked the photographers how they had found out about the grouse and the lek, and they all had the same answer. The very friend I had given the location to with his word that he would keep it private had told each of the people there that morning. I return to that lek each year in hopes that it will be like it used to be, but there are very few birds now and they display in a completely different location that is much more difficult to photograph. This one still hurts when I think about it, and I feel responsible for what's happened to those birds in their home. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying to never share any location information with anybody, but for the sake of the wildlife, it just pays to be so cautious with who you give information to. Come join me on an incredible African photo safari. Incredible wildlife encounters, comfortable safari camps with all of the accommodations, enough room in the vehicles for you and all of your gear with unobstructed views from both sides and the best guides out there. Our full days in the field lead to encounter after encounter, starting before the sun is risen and ending after it's set. These trips start in Kenya's stunning Masai Mara, and you can add on the optional trip extensions where we'll travel to different places and countries to focus on a larger variety of species and photo opportunities. Hit the link in the description below to get more details and sign up now. Let's get back to it. If you like wolves, you're going to love this next series of mistakes. These all came from one trip, one extended wolf trip that I went on years ago when I was just getting into wildlife photography, and I don't know to this day if I've ever made as many ridiculous mistakes on a single trip as I did on this one. I love backpacking and have been backpacking regularly for far longer than I've been seriously photographing wildlife. So early on in my time with the camera, I decided to embark on a 12-day backpacking trip specifically focused on finding wolves. This was an amazing trip, and as a new wildlife photographer, I got some really fun images that I was so thrilled with. Early on the trip, I found some fresh wolf prints and I began to track this wolf pack. Wolves move pretty quickly naturally, so I feel like I was always just behind the wolf pack. Got away from me once again. Every single time I go out to look for them, they get away somehow. Day after day I tracked this pack. On day 8 I stopped in a beautiful mountain meadow to catch my breath and filter some water. I looked over at the tree line and there was a beautiful wolf sitting there staring at me. Mistake number 1, my camera was in my backpack. I took my backpack off as quickly as I dared, but by the time I had my camera out, the wolf had disappeared into the trees and was nowhere to be seen. So the first lesson, keep your camera out and ready at all times, whether you're hiking or in a car, wherever. Keep that camera ready to go. I continued on my way. My camera was now out of my backpack and ready to go. That night I made camp at the edge of a large meadow in hopes that the wolves would come through that meadow since I knew that they were nearby. All that I ended up seeing that evening was an elk limp through the meadow. I took some pictures. It was really low light conditions, so I bumped my ISO all the way up, got my pictures, and then I retired for the night. The next morning, I returned to my spot on the edge of the meadow and waited. After about an hour, I finally saw the wolves that I had been tracking for so many days. One of these wolves stopped not far from me and let out this long, beautiful howl. My camera was out, I lifted it, took some pictures. This whole encounter lasted about 7 minutes with this wolf and some others nearby, and all the time I was just clicking away, thinking I was getting these incredible pictures. Looking at them afterwards, I was devastated. The only setting I had thought to change from the night before was my shutter speed. My ISO was still cranked all the way up from the night before, yielding totally unusable images. If this had happened on today's cameras and lenses, I think I would have been able to salvage some of those pictures, but on the lens and camera combination that I had back then, these pictures were just totally unusable. Lesson number 2, Get into the habit of adjusting your settings for the appropriate exposure whenever conditions change, even if there's nothing to photograph at the time. I ended that trip with some more incredible wolf encounters. These were some of the best pictures I think I've ever taken, even with that beginner kit camera and lens. These pictures were outstanding. I had wolves fishing. I had this beautiful white wolf posed perfectly in front of these golden aspens. I got another wolf howling, just absolutely incredible stuff. I took so many pictures on this trip that I had to swap out my memory card multiple times. Once I got home, I rushed to get my images on the computer. I pulled out my memory cards and quickly noticed that one was missing. I looked everywhere and was never able to find the card with those award-winning images. Lesson number 3, back up your photos and back up your backups. If you're on a trip and can't back things up, you better guard your memory cards with your life. Fun fact, I've repeated that trip multiple times over the years in hopes for similar results, and I still have yet to photograph a wolf. I'll be honest, all of these mistakes hurt a lot, especially at the time, and there's still a bit of a sting when I think about each one of them. But I'm also extremely grateful for each of these experiences, as they taught me important lessons that I'll never forget for wildlife photography, and they've helped me to improve over the years. Most of these mistakes are from early on in my time as a wildlife photographer, but I still do make mistakes quite often, and if you want to see the mistake of the century from a recent adventure that I had in Brazil's beautiful Pantanal, check this video out right here. Thank you so much for following along. I appreciate the constant support. Make those mistakes, learn those lessons, and then don't make them again. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.